Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this important briefing on the repression of the Holy Armenian Apostolic Church, the foundation of Christian Armenia by the government under the leadership, an important briefing about the repression of the Holy Armenian Apostolic Church, the foundation of Christian Armenia by the government under the leadership of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. You may be asking yourself, why are there no prelates speaking here today? Well, I'm posing that question back to you and see if you can come up with the answer to that question by the time this briefing is finished. And before I begin in earnest, I just wish to say that Sovereign Global Solutions is very pleased to host this event on behalf of the National Democratic Alliance of Armenia, the pro-Western, pro-democracy political movement promoting human rights, religious freedom, and sound governance in Armenia. We thank the team in Yerevan and also Dr. David Grigorian, a World Bank economist, Harvard scholar, and Armenian expert, for his inspiration in our work here today. Religious freedom and human rights are a foundational pillar of United States foreign policy. Human rights, freedom of speech, democracy, and a flourishing economy do not exist without religious freedom. It is the foundation of any solid democracy. Where religious freedom is protected, communities flourish, civil society strengthens, and the rule of law prevails. As the first nation to officially establish Christianity as their religion in 301 AD in a region of the world that was surrounded by Muslim neighbors who wanted to conquer them, the Holy Armenian Apostolic Church was the backbone of strength and conviction through the church, for the church. There is a lot of increased interest these days in Armenia, and last week in Armenia was an inaugural prayer breakfast for the nation. And to its credit, two of the speakers who spoke there addressed some of the issues that we will address here today. This briefing aims to shed light on what is really happening in Armenia, the growth of authoritarian repression starting with the foundation of Christianity in Armenia, the Holy Armenian Apostolic Church. Today you will hear from international legal experts, humanitarian and human rights experts, who will speak about how these repressions threaten Armenia today and into the future. The clash that is currently roaring between the church and the state in Armenia began in earnest with the defeat in 2023 of the war with Azerbaijan over the Armenian Christian enclave of Artsakh, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh. This led to a great suffering and the ethnic cleansing of the region, with over 120,000 Armenians being forced to flee to safety. It also brought the destruction of holy sites in Artsakh by the Azeris and 23 political prisoners, former leaders and presidents of Artsakh, who the Azeris wished to never release. For their opposition to these great losses, Prime Minister Pashinyan is silencing criticism and has jailed the church leading clerics, priests, and church staff. He has also imprisoned one of the wealthiest businessmen in Armenia, Samvel Karapetyan, for speaking out in defense of the Catholicos and the church. His assets, including his private electricity company, was seized and appropriated, Soviet style. He is also arresting journalists and politicians in order to silence and control any voice of resistance. These events are gaining attention internationally. In the world-renowned London Financial Times, just over 2 weeks ago, there was an ad, full-page size ad, that said, "What in God's name is happening in Armenia?" This ad coincided with the launch and release of an important international report that you will hear more about today regarding Armenians' authoritarian turn. So now, today, we come to Capitol Hill and draw the attention of Washingtonians to this event and to this briefing on the repression that is occurring right now in Armenia against the Holy Armenian Apostolic Church. And with that, I would like to introduce to you our first speaker. Dr. Peter Flew is an expert on religion and law in countries of the former Soviet Union. He holds a doctorate on the history of Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine, in Russia, from the University College London, where he has also taught history and language modules. He is also a qualified lawyer in England and Wales and has worked on a range of matters across the region for over 15 years. More recently, he has advised on religious freedom issues in Armenia, Estonia, and Ukraine. Dr. Flew is going to speak to us on the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church and its executive mission.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacqueline. It's a real privilege to be able to speak today and to present this white paper which came out a few weeks ago in London. I spent most of August in Armenia, where I undertook a lot of research, collecting evidence, witness statements to understand the situation with the persecution of the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church. The white paper documents the attacks on the Catholicos, the leader of the church, the arrests of bishops and clergy, and also the client that I act for, Mr. Samuel Karapetyan, who remains in detention to this day. Now, the white paper tries to set out several things. Firstly, why the church is so important, why it has a unique position in Armenian society, and how that is reflected in a specific constitutional mandate. And it's by understanding that constitutional mandate and how the church sought to act on it that we understand how shocking the attacks of Nikol Pashinyan were on the church, or are on the church. I'll document some of those specific attacks and then detail Samuel Karapetyan's own situation at the moment. So why is the church important? Why is it held in such high regard? Well, firstly, as Jacqueline mentioned, the Christianization of Armenia in 301, the adoption of Christianity, the first nation to do so under the influence of St. Gregory the Illuminator, the role of the church in giving birth to the written word and Armenia's unique literary culture, and the unbroken nature of the church's 1,700 years of service, which is unmatched by any secular institution in Armenia. It's the church that has played a critical role, not least during times of imperial subjugation and genocide. It's acted as a receptacle of Armenian nationality and culture. And the church acts as Armenia's conscience and memory, not least with respect to Nagorno-Karabakh. But it's especially that apostolic character of the church, which is both direct and autocephalous, which is particularly important here. And by that I mean that the church maintains independence from the mediating authority of any other church, be it Rome or Constantinople. And this goes to the heart of why the Prime Minister's attacks are so shocking. Trying to remove the Catholicos isn't some kind of boardroom takeover. This strikes at the heart of the internal affairs of the church, but it also has profound theological consequences. Now, that role as a receptacle of Armenian identity and culture is reflected in a constitutional mandate of the church. There we are. Excellent. And this is something that a previous Catholicos, Corentin Clerc, who was Catholicos from 94 to 99, helped to describe in terms of the relationship of the church with the state. He understood that the Armenian state was formed as a secular state, but however, cooperation between the church and state is also necessary, and that the church must be included in the national life of the country. And this role has been reflected in the current constitution, that is the 2015 version, something which the present Prime Minister seeks to overthrow and to redefine. Article 18.1 states that the Republic of Armenia shall recognize the exclusive mission of the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church as a national church in the spiritual life of the Armenian people, in the development of their national culture and the preservation of their national identity. And this is a position that reflects that history of the church and its exclusive role. And it's by fulfilling that constitutional mandate that the church has found itself in the crosshairs of Nikol Pashinyan. Now, the roots of the present crisis date back soon after the 2018 revolution with the new Armenian Catholicos movement. But one of the key turning points was this year, in May of 2025, at a conference held by the World Council of Churches in Bern. And this was devoted to Nagorno-Karabakh and the topic of the ethnic cleansing and the destruction of the heritage in that region. Now, Catholicos Corentin Clerc attended this conference, and he bemoaned the erasure of Armenian history in the territory, with the continued barbaric destruction of ancient Armenian monuments, Christian holy sites, settlements, and cemeteries. And he also discussed the protection of cultural values as not only being a sacred duty, but an imperative for preserving the history, faith, and identity of all peoples and nations. You can see here, he is fulfilling his role of the exclusive mission of the Church as under the Constitution. And it was within days of this statement that Nikol Pashinyan started his extraordinary attacks on Facebook, no less, in which he released reams of messages using obscenities and foul language. I'm not going to repeat them here, but they're documented in chronological order in the white paper that's available. At the same time, he also convened a coordinating council, a commission that seeks to overthrow the Catholicos and to replace him. He put out a statement with a Gmail email account saying, please write in if you would like to be on this commission. To date, we don't know who's on it and how it's operating. Now, one can only imagine if the leader of a Catholic country, say Giorgia Meloni in Italy, started attacking Pope Leo on Facebook and saying we shall convene a commission to overthrow Pope Leo. The same level of shock has rocked Armenian society. At the same time, we've seen bishops arrested, clergy arrested, and parishioners. One of those is Samuel Karapetyan. Now, he is one of the key benefactors of the church, a major philanthropist of the church, and he returned to Armenia in June of this year to attend the memorial service of the 40 days of his father's death. And on leaving the church, he was approached by a journalist who asked him, what is your opinion on the attacks on the Catholicos and the church? And he responded with this statement. What opinion should I have when a small group, forgetting Armenian history and the thousands of years of the Armenian church's history, has attacked the Armenian church and the Armenian people? Since I've always stood by the Armenian church and the Armenian people, I will become directly involved. If the politicians fail, then we will participate in our own way in all of this. Within a day, he was in jail, charged under Article 422 of the Criminal Code, which is to do with public cause of the seizure of power. Just for this statement here. And as Jacqueline has mentioned, since then, he's lost his business interests. That includes the electricity networks, but it also includes some of the results of his philanthropic work. For example, Yerevan's circus. These have all been stripped from him. He remains in jail to this day in pretrial detention. Now, his arrest and detention forms a part of a broader use of political prosecutions in Armenia, which is set out in the white paper. These have been criticized by Freedom House, the US State Department, among other international organizations. But it's especially the use of pretrial detention as a punishment in and of itself that is concerning, something that the US State Department has bemoaned, as well as organizations such as Human Rights Watch. So he's the latest in a long line of such abusive prosecutions. Now, since the publication of the white paper, the attacks have continued, and I just want to identify a couple of things that have come up. Firstly, Pashinyan has gone on record in a press conference recently in November to say that the church has no Catholicos, accusing the Catholicos of all Armenians of illegitimately occupying his position. At the same time, he's arrested the brother and nephew of Catholicos Corentin II, again using another part of the criminal code that's rarely used. But I'm especially concerned by Pashinyan's statement about the spiritual and moral renewal of the Armenian Apostolic Church. This really isn't something for Pashinyan to be commenting on and getting involved in. And I'm especially concerned with his efforts to create splits in the church by supporting renegade clergy, attending services at the Veldkamp monastery, for example. Now, as a historian of orthodoxy in Russia and Ukraine, I'm well aware of the 1920s experience and the movement of renovationism or obnovlenчество, which was a movement to create a split within the church, to liberalize and secularize the church from within and to demoralize. And I'm concerned that this is perhaps the latest front which Pashinyan is opening against the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church. So my message is very simple. I hope you read and engage with the white paper. It's available online as well. And to raise your voice, to add your voice to the chorus of international condemnation that's growing about this issue, that's growing in awareness. The attacks on the Catholicos must end. The bishops and the clergy must be released. And Samuel Karapetyan must be released, and his assets must be returned to him. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lauren Homer. Lauren Homer is an attorney specialized in international human rights and religious freedom advocacy through Law and Liberty Trust, which is an NGO since 1990. Lauren serves on the steering committee of the IRF Roundtable and is co-chair of the Middle East Working Group, has also chaired its Afghan Emergency Task Force and its Ukraine Emergency Task Force. Her IRF, which is International Religious Freedom, for those of you who don't know that term. Her IRF focus has been on Russia, Ukraine, and other former Soviet republics, China, the Middle East, Syria and Iraq, and Afghanistan. She is an advisor to the Religious Freedom Initiative of Mission Eurasia, a member of the Religious Liberty Partnership, and a member of the advisory board of Save the Persecuted Christians. Lauren is a graduate of Duke University, Yale University, and Columbia University School of Law. Lauren will address Armenia's actions against the Armenian Apostolic Church and how they violate its own constitution and laws.
Thanks very much, and I also am honored to get a chance to speak here. I have, through our work with the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, we put together a letter trying to stave off Azerbaijan's invasion of Nagorno-Karabakh back in 2023. And my association with Armenia goes back to 1990 when I started working with a Armenian lawyer named Vagan Emin, son of a famous Armenian poet who was my best friend and colleague in registering religious organizations in Russia, something that had never been done before. So my specialty is, as was said, in the law, and I'm going to talk about the law. And my aim here is to support the rule of law in Armenia's dealings with the worldwide Armenian Apostolic Church. Prime Minister Pashinyan is demanding the resignation of the Catholicos on moral grounds and declares his right to set up a committee to decide who the next Catholicos shall be. He's ordered arrests for hierarchs for joining with his political opponents and asking that he resign. Thank you. And he's abolished the Armenian Apostolic Church's right, which is stated in law, exclusive right to teach religious curriculum in public schools. The Armenian Apostolic Church has the right under Armenian law to self-governance, to autonomy, and non-interference. It belongs to the world and its members, not to even Armenia or the Armenia Prime Minister. Okay, thanks. So turning now, I'm just going to quickly go through these provisions. Armenia's constitution provides in its section on the state and religious organizations that religious organizations shall be separate from the state. Now, that's not what people in America sometimes think about, that when they hear separation of church and state, they think the church should not be involved with the government. But it was actually, the First Amendment was set up to protect churches from government control. And that's exactly what the Armenians were thinking about when they drafted this constitution, because they had long experience as part of the Soviet Union with government domination and infiltration of the church. As was said before, the Republic of Armenia recognizes the exceptional mission of the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church as the national church, and then it goes so far in the Constitution as to reference a law that could be set up, and there is such a law that regulates activities of the Armenian Apostolic Church. In the Constitution, again, there's a provision: religious organizations have equal rights and shall enjoy autonomy. I could go on at length about what autonomy means for religious organizations. There's lots of case law. The European Court of Human Rights has spoken on this, but basically autonomy means a church has the right to make decisions on its internal affairs, on who its leaders are, and so forth. The Constitution just coincidentally provides that everyone shall have the right to freely express his opinion, and that everyone shall have the right to freely organize and participate in peaceful and unarmed assemblies. So the people who are being arrested for organizing anti-government protests or for speaking out against the government actually have the right to do it under the Armenian Constitution. And these limits, this can only be restricted by law with the aim of protecting state security, preventing crimes, protecting the public order, health and morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. But protests really are legitimate in Armenia. Moving on to the law of the Republic of Armenia on freedom of conscience and religious organizations, it starts out in the preamble, again, referring to the Armenian Apostolic Church as the national church of the Armenian people and as an important bulwark for the edification of its spiritual life and national preservation. In section 6, and this is one of the more significant sections to me, it says that in Armenia the following religious organizations operate: the Armenian Apostolic Church with her traditional organizations, and then other religious organizations which are established in accordance with private ownership and bylaws. In other words, in this law, they just incorporated the entire structure of the Armenian Orthodox Church as the legal basis for its existence. They didn't have to file what is filed in other countries, something maybe called a statute, a constitution, or bylaws, enumerating how the church is organized. Then in the same law, there's a specific provision, again, in section 17, the church and state are separate, that on the basis of this separation, the state shall not interfere in the activities and internal affairs of the church and religious organizations. When they're talking about the church there, they're talking about the Armenian Apostolic Church, and that the state shall not obstruct its efforts to, among other things, which are expressly reserved to the church, carry out education and state educational institutions, which is something that Prime Minister Pashinyan has abrogated. And then in this law on freedom of conscience, it says the state guarantees the rights of the members or employees of religious organizations to take part in the civil and political life on an equal basis with other citizens. This is an issue that was hotly debated in the 90s about whether religious figures, priests, bishops, whatever, could participate in politics, and Armenia says yes, they can. Then in 2007, there was a special law on the relationship between the Republic of Armenia and the Church, and it again recognizes self-governance, and it repeats separation of church and state. So in my view, the idea that the Prime Minister can tell the Catholicos that he has to resign. The Catholicos is like the Pope in the Catholic Church. He is the senior authority, not just in Armenia. The Armenian Apostolic Church operates all around the world. So the Armenian population is 3 million, and about 97-98% consider themselves Armenian Orthodox. But it has a worldwide membership of 9 million people. So how can Prime Minister Pashinyan assert the right to decide for 9 million people, the vast majority of whom don't even live in Armenia, that he's going to decide who runs their church? The Mother See of Holy, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Ekmizan, is the preeminent center of authority in the worldwide Armenian Apostolic Church, and Corentin II is the Supreme Patriarch and Catholicos. And it's really an important position. They have a set of bylaws that goes into some of what he's responsible for, but he has a very special clerical and ecclesiastical and theological responsibility within the church. He's just not, as was said before, like the president of a corporation who is just interchangeable with anyone else. And they have among others, a specific document for something called the National Ecclesiastical Assembly, which is the supreme governing body of the Armenian Apostolic Church. And that body is entrusted with electing the Catholicos. I'd be happy to share with people the content of that. It's quite long and detailed. It provides for election of people who participate in the assembly at the time of the election of a Catholicos. I'm sure also under canon law that within the Armenian Apostolic Church there is a provision for what, well, in the Anglican Church we call deposing a hierarch. Sometimes, I think in the case of the Catholicos, it might be called dethroning him, because in Orthodox churches they speak about the enthronement of a patriarch, which is what he is. And so there's a procedure for it. There's a provision for ecclesiastical trials. So, if the Catholicos has done something wrong, he could be held to account in that way. But the autonomy of the church should ensure that this is something that happens within the structure of the Armenian Apostolic Church. It's not a government function. And certainly the Prime Minister has no role in this at all. He has no right to set up a committee that's going to choose a Catholicos. It must be done in accordance with this. And again, it's not just about Armenia. There's a Armenian patriarch in Jerusalem. There's one for Constantinople. There's one in Lebanon. There's an Armenian Apostolic Church in the United States, in Europe, various countries, throughout Central and South America. It's a very large organization, and all these people have a right to participate in the selection of a Catholicos, the same way that we see in Rome. We see the cardinals assemble in the Sistine Chapel and stay there until they've selected a pope and the white smoke comes out. So this is ecclesiastical, theological, and holy ground, if you will. And I think that the Prime Minister is wrong in his attacks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. Next, we are going to hear from Dr. Joel Veldkamp. Joel is the Director for Public Advocacy at Christian Solidarity International. He also serves as CSI's representative to the United Nations in Geneva. Since 2020, he has been at the forefront of CSI's advocacy efforts for the Armenians of Artsakh, otherwise known as Nagorno-Karabakh. He holds a PhD in international history from the Geneva Graduate Institute for his thesis on the Armenian and Arabic-speaking Christians of Aleppo during the French Mandate. Joel just visited Armenia for the prayer breakfast and is sharing his observations and reflections based on his visit. Joel, would you like to come and join us?
Okay, how's this mic? Good. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and thank you to you and your whole team at Sovereign Global Solutions for organizing this very important and actually overdue event. As Jacqueline said, I have the honor to work for Christian Solidarity International. We are an interconfessional Christian human rights group with affiliates in 8 different countries, including the United States. We work with partners on the ground in 15 countries around the world to help persecuted Christians and other people who are persecuted for their faith. We also advocate on their behalf in the media, with Western governments, and with international organizations. I'll just keep talking in the meantime. Armenia is a country that we know well. CSI's president, Dr. John Eibner, first traveled to Nagorno-Karabakh in 1991 with Baroness Caroline Cox, who at that time was a leader of CSI's affiliate in the UK. In the dark days of the First Karabakh War, one of our main partners in Nagorno-Karabakh was Archbishop Parkev Martirosyan. The Archbishop's extraordinary personal bravery in organizing the defense of his people was our first introduction to the Armenian Apostolic Church. For the past 5 years, we have been supporting the Armenians forcibly displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan's genocidal attacks. We are also advocating for their right to return to their homeland and for freedom for the 23 Armenian hostages still held in Baku. Unfortunately, we are now confronting another form of persecution in Armenia, and this one comes from the Armenian government itself. Last week, Dr. Eibner and I were in Yerevan to attend the inaugural Republic of Armenia prayer breakfast. This prayer breakfast was a positive sign of increased cooperation between Christians in Armenia and Christians in the West. During the 44-day war of 2020, and during Azerbaijan's genocidal blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, this solidarity was sadly mostly lacking. And we know that the organizers of the prayer breakfast have worked for years to increase concern and support for Armenia among Christians in the United States, and we salute their efforts. If you haven't traveled to Armenia recently, it may be difficult for you to imagine how repressive the political atmosphere has become. This was my 5th trip to Armenia in 4 years, and I was shocked by how different the public mood was this time. The day that I arrived in Yerevan, masked agents from Armenia's national security services arrested 2 podcasters on charges of hooliganism. They were sentenced to 2 months of pretrial detention. Their names are Vazken Sakhatelyan and Narek Samsonian. We had submitted a formal request to the Ministry of Justice to visit the imprisoned clergymen. Eventually, the Ministry of Justice responded to our request, claiming, George Orwell style, that they lack the jurisdiction to grant visits to prisoners. One of our interlocutors was shocked by this. They said that even during the time of Armenia's authoritarian president, Serge Sargsyan, human rights groups were not blocked from visiting political prisoners. A major press outlet invited us to come to their office in Yerevan for an interview. When we arrived, we found the editor in a flustered state. Just a few hours before, a parliamentarian from the ruling party had made a Facebook post suggesting that their building be seized by the government. In case there is any doubt, let me confirm what my co-panelists have already described in more detail, that Armenia is witnessing a systematic, state-led campaign to undermine, divide, and persecute Armenia's national church. The arrests of Armenian clergy and their supporters must be seen in the context of the Prime Minister's demand that the Catholicos of all Armenians resign from his post, a demand which, as Lauren and Peter said, coming from the leader of a government is itself a flagrant assault on religious freedom. Armenian human rights groups have not been silent about this. On October 19, 2 days after a lawyer for the detained clergy was dragged out of his car and arrested in the street, a group of human rights NGOs in Armenia made a public statement condemning the selective, punitive, disproportionate, and unlawful application of criminal justice mechanisms by the government in its campaign against the church. On November 5, the Armenian Center for Public Rights published a comprehensive report detailing how the Armenian government has used falsified evidence and selective prosecution to imprison members of the clergy, and publicly incited hate against the church. And I just want to linger on this point because I'm not sure it will be mentioned or understood otherwise. Archbishop Bagrat Galstanian is in jail on charges of trying to foment a coup using terrorism. These charges were based on recordings that were released to the public by prosecutors in June. And these recordings seemed to show the Archbishop and his supporters discussing shooting people and using violence to seize power in a revolution. About a month and a half later, the full recordings were released, and we know now that that is not what they were talking about, not even close. And that is the sole basis for the accusation that they were planning to overthrow the government. And I still meet people in this town who are telling me, oh, the Archbishop was planning a coup with terrorism and such. Everyone in Armenia knows this. The evidence was falsified. It's not in doubt. I had the privilege to meet with or dialogue with 4 different Armenian human rights groups on my visit. These meetings were by far the most encouraging part of my trip. These human rights defenders are talented, professional, and impartial. And their message to us was consistent. Judicial independence and the rule of law are gravely threatened in Armenia, and it is becoming harder to speak freely about it. As best as they can, they are preparing themselves for a new era of authoritarianism in Armenia. Armenia, it seems, is following its neighbor Georgia down the path of illiberalism. These human rights defenders also told us that those groups who do speak out against the persecution of the church risk being accused, baselessly, of being agents of the Kremlin. The same accusation has been circulated against the leadership of the Armenian Apostolic Church itself, including by advocacy groups based here in Washington, D.C. To date, no hard evidence for this accusation has been presented. In Armenia, this accusation is even more potent and more dangerous than it is in the United States. And Americans should know, just as well as Armenians, that false accusations of collusion with Russia are a highly effective way for governments and deep states to suppress dissent. Unfortunately, these Armenian human rights defenders also told us that when they bring their concerns to the US Embassy and other Western embassies, they receive a cool reception. Indeed, so far, the State Department and the rest of the US government have been completely silent about the attack on the church. I must mention here, though, a notable exception. Dr. Asif Mahmoud, the co-chair of the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. In his personal capacity as a guest at Armenia's prayer breakfast last week, he used his speaking slot to call for the release of the clergy. This attack on the national church is coming as US-Armenia relations are at an all-time high. President Trump has invested a great deal of his time, energy, and political capital to promote the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The administration is clearly enthusiastic about the potential here, and rightly so. A US-mediated peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan promises a faster trade route across Eurasia that bypasses Russia and Iran and would greatly expand US influence in this crucial region. We are concerned, and we think that President Trump should be concerned, that the Armenian Prime Minister's campaign against the church puts all of this at risk. Armenia has long been the freest country in its region. But ironically, even as it seems to pivot to the West, the Armenian government is building a new authoritarian political system. An Armenia whose vibrant civil society has been pulverized, where people are afraid to speak, dialogue, and organize, where policy is controlled by an increasingly erratic, unaccountable, and unpopular prime minister, will be, at best, a fragile ally of the United States. But more importantly, we should consider the implications of this attack on the church for Armenia's national culture. As Peter explained so well, the Armenian Apostolic Church is 1,700 years old. For most of those 1,700 years, there was no Armenian state. The church held the Armenian nation together. Through centuries of statelessness, dispossession, and even genocide, the church has preserved Armenia's unique identity as the world's first Christian nation, a priceless spiritual and theological heritage. Prime Minister Pashinyan envisions a future Armenia where the church has no social or political influence independent of the state. The church will no longer exist as a mediating institution between state and society. It will no longer have moral authority to provide guidance, unity, and a common vision for the Armenian nation. Instead, there will be 3 million individual believers who attend churches led by a state-appointed hierarchy and relate to each other largely or only through the state. The peace process underway now promises an era of economic integration and open borders between Armenia and its neighbors Azerbaijan and Turkey. With no independent national church to act as a counterweight, Armenia risks losing its Christian identity altogether. And an Armenia with a severely weakened national identity is not an Armenia that's going to be helpful to the US for very long. If the president wants to avoid this outcome, it's time for the US government to break its silence. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. We next have the privilege of hearing from Mr. Corentin Clerc, all the way from France just for this event. He is the former head of mission for the international NGO SOS Chrétien d'Orient, which I know is not as beautiful as you would say it, but in Armenia, which helps Christians from Eastern churches to live on their ancestral lands and thus preserve Christianity in the regions where it originated. Corentin lived in Armenia for 3 years and experienced the wars of 2020 and 2023, which he lived through on the front line with the association's volunteers. Corentin will speak about the Artsakh wars, a desire to destroy Christian Armenia with internal and external enemies. Please welcome Corentin.
So good afternoon to all of you. The official flag of the Republic of Armenia features Noah's Ark, standing on Mount Ararat in a central position. According to biblical tradition, it was on this high mountain in the Caucasus Range that the boat carrying the regenerated humanity came to rest. Nikol Pashinyan's government has indicated that it wants to remove this symbol from the national flag, keen both to bow to Turkish demands and to remove any reference to Christianity from Armenian history. Armenia is a Christian bastion in the Middle East, in the middle of the Caucasus. It was also the first state to officially adopt Christianity as its state religion in the year 301. Armenia still faces an existential threat today. It could still disappear from the map, eaten away by the pan-Turkist appetites of its ambitious and revanchist neighbors. I lived alongside Armenians 2 wars from the field in 2020 and 2023, and visited all of the sites I will talk about. In each case, Azerbaijan sought to destroy all traces of Armenian identity, and the Armenian government refused to denounce this state of affairs, believing that this would guarantee peace. And yet, at present, more than 200 square kilometers of Armenian territory are occupied by Azerbaijan. We still demand dozens of war prisoners, including civilians, despite of the signature of a peace treaty. Over the centuries, the Armenian Church has sheltered the Armenian soul, even during 6 centuries in the absence of a territorial state entity. As the guarantor of Armenian identity, it is now the target of a full-scale attack by the central government for daring to remind the letter of its responsibilities and denounce the threats weighing on the country. The war waged against Armenia by Azerbaijan was territorial, but also unquestionably religious. More than the new territories, the goal was above all to erase all traces of Armenian presence on these lands. Several examples illustrate this. On the 400 monuments and churches listed by the church in Artsakh, Most have been either destroyed, modified, or converted into mosques. This was the case, for example, in Hadrut, where the church of Surp-Sarkis was completely razed in 2022. As in Vazgenachen, cemeteries were destroyed, graves were desecrated. Some of them were reduced to rubble, which was symbolically used to pave the new highway between Baku and Stepanakert, the capital of Armenian Karabakh. Yeah, please. Alongside this symbolic destruction, history have been rewritten. At the Dadivank monastery, built in the 9th century, for example, priests from a fake Albanian church in the Caucasus were appointed by the Azerbaijani government to celebrate an erzast of Christian liturgy. In the church of Surp-Sarkis, centuries-old Armenian inscriptions dating from the 12th century was hammered out and replaced with inscription in Albanian. The Armenian government never denounced this reality. The most symptomatic example was the destruction of the Cathedral of Sushi, which is there, whose pointed roof, typical of Armenian churches, was bombed and destroyed. It was replaced by a dome. President Ilham Aliyev chose to recite the Muslim prayer as a symbol. Unfortunately, there is no longer any doubt about the cultural dimension of this conflict. In order to erase all traces of Armenian presence, Azerbaijan has chosen to attack the religious properties that abounded in Artsakh. Unfortunately, there has been no condemnation from the Armenian authorities or Nikol Pashinyan. Since the defeat of 2023, the Armenian government has never publicly denounced these attacks. Only the Church, allied countries, and certain international organizations have raised the alarm about this ongoing erasure of memory. The Armenian government's inaction has even prevented them from bringing the case before the competent courts, as they have been unable to find anyone within the Armenian government willing to engage with them. Worse still, the Armenian government accepted without any compensation the humiliating peace condition imposed by his enemy and the preconditions for signing a memorandum for the restoration of relations with Turkey. Nikol Pashinyan, received in May 2022 by President Erdogan, acknowledged that he accepted the preconditions, which included renouncing any mention to the Armenian genocide, paying compensation for the war, and accepting the mass settlement of several thousand Azerbaijani citizens in the Republic of Armenia. What a diplomatic success. Finally, the Armenian government has sought to prevent the Church from acting in Karabakh. In particular, during the blockade organized between December 22 and September 23, the state disassociates itself from the Armenians of Artsakh, refusing to break the blockade and to supply them with basic necessities. After the conflict, Pashinyan's Armenian government sought to break up the displaced community by dispersing them to various regions of the country, thereby cutting them off from their only sources of support and confusing their bearings. Everything was done to destroy the spirit of these small village communities that had already lost everything. Calling for the Church non-interference in national affairs, Nikol Pashinyan's government nevertheless stepped up its efforts to take control of the Armenian Church. Personal attacks against the Catholicos, the imprisonment of bishops and priests, attendance at Mass celebrated by a defrocked priest on the last October at the Ovanavang monastery. Anything goes to weaken the Church. The Prime Minister is behaving like the worst kind of autocrat, imprisoning dissenting voices and seeking to recreate a parallel church structured around figures he controls. Beyond these serious interferences, Pashinyan's government continues to promote anti-Christian values. Gender ideology, taught by foreign associations in provincial villages, particularly in the Sunnic region. Challenging traditional family structures. Refusal to mobilize the nation for its defense by considering the end of military service. Removing all religious references from public places and schools. Armenia cannot be content with its position of weakness. It must raise its head high, reinforced by new alliances that it will be able to forge in the coming years. The Armenian people are prepared to make any sacrifice to achieve this. The Church is an essential pillar of Armenia's resurrection. Let me conclude by telling you a sad but evocative story. During the 2020 war, I saw a unit hold a position for 5 days without food and almost without water, thanks solely to the presence of a priest from a neighboring village who came to visit them. His mere presence reminded the soldiers why they were fighting, not for a political system or geopolitical interests, but to defend an entire civilization. And they died for this. Glory to their memory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corentin, and thank you all of our esteemed experts and speakers. Well, what you've heard today is sort of from A to Z about the church and what is happening to not only the church, but to civil society at large, to the structure of law and the ignoring of it. And what we really come away with is understanding the church's mission is to guard Christian Armenia and its culture, and has always really stood in that place and been that role for Armenians. And this is why we have to, I mean, in addition to that, we have the Constitution, international law, and every other edifice that grounds the structure of the church and its right to do what it does. And so we're more convinced than ever about this. And one of the things that I think is important also for our government and any government to take note of is that the church is getting worldwide support. It's not just from the Armenian Apostolic Church, which sadly doesn't feel comfortable to be in public defending themselves, but we have statements of support from various bishops of the Armenian Apostolic Church, the one from Greece, and then there was the World Council of Churches released their own supporting letter with all the churches, that means all the churches of major Christian faith in the world signed on to it, saying, we deplore what you are doing here in Armenia to our brother church. The Russian Orthodox Church condemned the Armenian authorities' interference. The Syriac Patriarch backs the Armenian Apostolic Church. That happened in July. And then recently, also statements by all the Armenian prelates here in the United States. They're the bishops here in the United States, and also there are bishops throughout the world. So the truth is that it is being recognized throughout the world as for what it is. And so I would like to open this up now. If anybody has another a comment or a question that we could perhaps ask. Mark Milosh.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. Mark Milosh, I work for the Republican Catholic to Continental Human Rights Commission. I'd like to, this is very persuasive. Thank you very much. I was texting a friend in Armenia. Why hadn't you told me this? Really, really shocking. Presumably, I think we're here today because you're making this presentation in Congress because some form of congressional engagement would be welcome. I understand very well why there are no Armenian prelates here, but it still does remain difficult for members to engage in something that affects the life of the church without hearing at some level, in some way, privately, otherwise, that responsible figures in the church think it would be useful. But there are other difficulties in getting involved here too. It seems like U.S. policy toward Armenia, like what's the policy? U.S. policy toward Armenia has been kind of a black box for years. You don't even really know what it is. You ask them, you get these ridiculous, general euphemistic statements. No serious discussion of it for the past 7 or 8 years. And then until speculation is right. Is Pashinyan an American client or not? We don't know. He comes to power supported by, apparently supported by NGOs, Western NGOs, some of them funded by U.S. government. Yet it's not clear to what extent, what his relationship was with the, and has it changed? Again, we don't know, but it's relevant what kind of relationship Pashinyan has with our government, but we don't really know what it is, and we don't really know what is the policy toward the country or what's driving it. It seems like it's first they probably figure out what's the policy toward Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Azerbaijan, and then as a derivative function, we know the policy for Armenia, but. Obviously, I think there should still be room to engage here, but without knowing the policy, the priorities, the relationships, and hearing anything from the church, these are things that, in order to engage, it would be really useful to clarify. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Mark. Would anybody else like to take a stab at that? Anybody else have a question or a comment? Even in relation to what Mark said, yes, Sam.
I guess I just have a follow-up question for Joel. You had kind of mentioned the, Sam Smith with the Christian Post. So you had mentioned that, some of the allegations of a coup against the Archbishop and how the prosecutors had released audio and then later came out that audio was not in the appropriate context. Is there a way that you can kind of just contextualize within a few minutes just what additional context was added that made the difference? Does that make sense?
Would you mind stepping up to the mic? Yeah.
Just to respond to Mark really quickly, I do think some congressional engagement would be welcome, and I want to note that one congressman already has spoken out about this crisis, and that's Brad Sherman from California. So frankly, we're waiting for a Republican to join him, and that would be excellent. The context of the coup allegations against Archbishop Bagrat. So Archbishop Bagrat is from a region of Armenia called Tavush, certain sections of which were unilaterally conceded to Azerbaijan last year, 2024. Archbishop Bagrat led a civil disobedience movement against those concessions, and when that movement failed, he led a march to Yerevan. He had a huge rally in the main square of Yerevan, engaged in various other civil disobedience actions, and he announced himself as a candidate for prime minister, saying that Armenia needs a leadership change. So it was a vigorous political movement. It involved civil disobedience, and its goal was to get the Armenian parliament to dismiss the prime minister, which I think, as Lauren was saying, these are constitutionally protected actions in Armenia. That was all last year, and the movement kind of fizzled out. In June of this year, he and 12 of his associates were arrested, and the prosecutors made these recordings public, along with a document supposedly outlining their plans to seize power through terrorism. And one of the recordings involved the Archbishop saying, "We need to shoot 2 people, and the rest will fall into line." And the prosecutor said, "See, he wants to shoot some people in the government, and then that's how they'll take power, through terror." The full transcript shows that they're talking about how when they're the government in the future, when they've already taken power, how will they make sure that mandatory conscription is enforced? And they're saying that if people try to desert, then we'll shoot 1 or 2, and that will be the end of the problem. Not something that I would want my priest to say necessarily, but it is not a coup plot. This was a fabrication by the prosecutors in order to imprison an archbishop of the church. I think that's, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Joel. David.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'd like to.
Yeah, I think
Is it on? Yes.
It's for the live
For
stream.
the live stream.
Okay.
Just thank all
So
the
speak up
panelists
for
for
everybody
their
else.
incredible presentations.
Yeah.
We all need the support. My question really is going to echo Mark's one. But before I lay that out, I think I want the audience to understand and make no mistake that Armenia is under attack. And as a number of our panelists explained, this is not just about church. The government of Armenia has abandoned Armenians in Artsakh. It has destroyed the foundations of institutional foundations of Armenia's defense, Armenia's education, and now the church. And it's done by a sitting prime minister, which makes the situation very, very difficult. So the question to you is, what could civil society organizations, especially in the diaspora, to do more of to shed light on what's happening in Armenia, so that Armenia's allies, Western allies, not only understand what's at stake, but also what exactly is happening and start believing facts and not fiction. Thank you.
Thank you. So, anybody here want to take that on, answer that question? Yeah, go for it.
In 2023, we had a letter signed by over 100 people asking the United States to step in and basically tell Azerbaijan not to invade Nagorno-Karabakh, to stop the blockade of food and all. So, and there were lots of NGOs, and we were kind of united around that. And I will say that. Well, I've been told anyway that in the U.S. a lot of Armenians support the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party, and Biden was president then, so they expected something back, and they expected people to speak out, but not that many people did. We had the situation of U.S. diplomats arriving in Yerevan for the funeral of Nagorno-Karabakh, not to do anything to stop it. So I think, civil society can only do so much. We can call attention to the issues within Armenia. They can call attention to the issues. It's up to the Armenian people, and that's why I think what Pashinyan is doing is so dangerous, because he's dividing a very small country that is surrounded by very unfriendly neighbors. Azerbaijan and Turkey, immediately after the seizure of Nagorno-Karabakh, we're talking about seizing Western Azerbaijan. Well, Western Azerbaijan is Armenia. So I think you have to think politically and geopolitically. It's more going to be about decision makers in the U.S. and other governments getting involved. The OSCE, Helsinki group, these are the groups that could really make a difference. But, NGOs basically, we have a microphone, but we're powerless to affect change unless we can get the attention of government leaders.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, we, to go back to Mark's earlier point and Joel's point as well, we have seen actually Democrats standing up and speaking about what's going on here, but we have not had a Republican member stand up and say the same thing. And so that would definitely be a big help. and we would look forward to and would welcome the United States to turn their attention to this fact that the really the most important impacting point of it is that it does threaten the future of Armenia. It threatens them as a nation. It definitely, the division that is happening from within the country, it threatens them as a nation, it threatens them as a partner in the future, and it threatens their own ability to keep their own peace. So, yeah, we would definitely welcome a few more friends on the Hill. Well, with that, I would just like to say thank you so much for your rapt attention and time, and we appreciate your coming today and learning from our esteemed experts. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. They've traveled, most of them traveled from Europe. 3 of them traveled from Europe to get here. Even though Joel's an American, he lives in Switzerland. So every single one of them had some serious travel involved. And don't go home without taking one of these amazing white papers. It's an amazing publication and a resource. And we also have the attacks on the church timeline. We've been tracking them with each single attack. We've been tracking them. We have those white papers up here as well. But thank you very much for coming, everybody.